Hello, and I'm here today with Peter Gaston, Innovation Lead at VCCP. We wrote a story last week about Snapchat's annual partner summit. It's kind of like their upfronts.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And they announced a lot of different things, a lot of updates, a lot of new things. What really caught your eye was this new thing they're launching called Snap Minis. Do you want to explain what Snap Minis are? And then we'll get into why it could be really interesting.
Yeah, Snap Minis are, I guess you could think of them as like micro programs. They're little HTML5 apps that kind of concentrate on a singular piece of functionality, and they can be shared in chats by Snapchat users. The examples they showed in their keynote was, for example, there's a Headspace Mini where you and some friends can kind of meditate, take some time together. And there was one for buying tickets using a company called Atom. So you can choose your cinema seats. Obviously, no one can go to the cinema at the moment, but when things get back to a semblance of normality. But really, it's just this idea of having Snapchat as a platform almost. You and your friends being able to collaborate on getting tasks done. And these are a thing that have been really, really popular in Chinese apps for 5 or 6 years already. I think WeChat was the first to introduce them. It adds transactional capability to social apps.
That transactional element of it, why do you think that's important? Do you think that people just fundamentally don't want to use lots of different apps? Or is there something about communicating within Snapchat plus using an app that is really exciting?
I think we're sort of seeing a growing social use of all kinds of things. There's been a big trend this year already, especially kind of accelerated by the lockdown, of social watching, social listening. Spotify have introduced these new social listening tools. There was the Netflix party, so people could watch videos together. And especially now that everybody's separated from each other, I think that's the critical part, as it brings a little bit back of that social and excitement and interest back to doing quite boring transactional things.
So you're saying that social media has become boring almost?
I think it's almost the opposite. I think but shopping, I think especially e-commerce, is quite boring. Now, Amazon is a giant and it's exceptionally good at what it does, but nobody would ever really say they have a lot of fun shopping on Amazon, really. And so there's a lot of things you want to get advice from your friends. The physical retail experience is much more social. And I think this is something that's, again, to go back to China, which is where this craze has been huge for 4 or 5 years. There's this real growing sense there of wanting to get that physical experience into e-commerce again. And it's really, the equivalent, I think, of going back to the high street or going to a department store or something like that, but doing it entirely online.
Interesting. And you talked a lot about retail just then. So what do you think the opportunities are for brands? Is it just making the platform more engaging with more interesting ways for people on Snapchat to communicate with each other? Or do you think there's much more of a direct e-commerce play, like you're actually, as a brand, you'd be able to sell directly on Snapchat through this?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. If it depends on what your business and your brand does, but there's definitely scope for doing things, games, tools, fun things that people can share amongst their friends. But I think retail is probably the big... There's a shift in retail happening at the moment, I believe, to become more social. And you can see this with Facebook Shops, which was announced just a couple of weeks ago. There was a quote by Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snapchat, and he said, well, I think you need to really think more about e-commerce. He said, I think there's and I'm not quoting directly, but there's a big opportunity for e-commerce in Snapchat because you have friends who want to go out to see a film together, or you have friends who are deciding on a dress for prom, or whatever these things are, these social decisions. There's a great opportunity in Snapchat particularly, but in other social media as well, but there's a great opportunity in Snapchat particularly to let retailers enter that space and allow some of the fun and excitement of shopping to come back. Just building this stuff is no guarantee of success. Snapchat's strategy is to have a platform. That doesn't necessarily mean that strategy is going to succeed. If anybody has a chance, it is Snapchat, because I think they're kind of very, as I've mentioned the audience before, they've got a very specific audience that they know very, very well. They've got tools in there for inspiration, and they're probably one of the most influential social networks in terms of other features going into other social networks that we've seen probably in the last 4 or 5 years. So I think there's a good chance they can make it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will.
Peter Gaston, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to Campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much.